Welcome back to the Mardiyah Show, where we're talking about the prevalence of prison and gang culture in many Islamic communities. What was once considered something that was specific to a diaspora of Muslims is now systemic across cultural lines. And today, inshallah ta'ala, we want to deal with the mistakes that many brothers and sisters make upon their return home from prison. You have many brothers and sisters who go into the prison system, and while in the prison system, they make mistakes that set them up for failure even before they return home from prison. So every step that they make upon their release from prison is in the wrong direction, setting them up for the cycle of recidivism, and that is to go in and out of the prison system repeatedly. Today, inshallah ta'ala, I have a special guest, someone that is very dear to me and someone that I love, I have an affinity to because of my closeness with him. And he is very involved and very active in the Islamic community, having studied Arabic, having taught Arabic and the basics of Islam. He was my sheikh before I was Shadeed Muhammad. Help me to welcome my guest, Aquil Onque. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thanks for coming on the show.
No problem, Sheikh.
For those who don't know, this was the man who gave me the name Shadeed Muhammad. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know at the moment that he named me Shadeed that my life would be difficult from that point forward, right? As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that, or as the scholars, they say that every individual has a share or portion of the meaning of their name. And Shadeed means harsh, stern, and firm. And my life has been all of that and some since he named me that.
I would say real fast out of defense, one of the meanings also for Shadeed is strong. And he always reminded me that when he was studying abroad, some of the ulama would give him a hard time by his name. So I told him, I said, well, you tell the shuyukh that the Prophet Muhammad said that the strong man or the aggressive man is not the one that can fight or wrestle one to the ground, but it's the one who can control himself when he's angry. MashaAllah. So I said, if you tell the sheikh that hadith, they should leave you alone, inshallah. So
yeah, I did get some. I got a hard time from some of the scholars over there. I love them dearly, but they gave me a very hard time. You can't call yourself Shadeed. That's not a good name for you.
MashaAllah.
So let's talk about this issue of brothers and sisters returning home from prison. I want to concentrate more so on the brothers, but I know that there are a large population of Muslim women, having worked in the Department of Corrections myself for some time, and having seen both sides of the fence in my life. There are a large group of Muslims that many of them set themselves up for failure in the prison system before they even come home. And then when they get home, they find themselves making these mistakes and can't figure out why. That the origin of the mistakes that they are making is predicated on some of the decisions that they made while they were in prison. So what are some of the mistakes that Muslims make in the prison system, that whether they go into the prison system as Muslims or they embrace Islam in the prison system, that kind of sets them up for failure even before they get out?
I think when you look at just a human being in general, whether they be Muslims or not Muslims, it's very similar to engineering. In engineering, if you begin a course and you may be just 1/16th off in the very beginning, it's very small. It's very, very small. And you think that it's okay because it's very small. But the longer you go on, that 1/16th grows wider and wider apart.
Wow.
And I think what happens is that in our lives that we shortchange ourselves. We take shortcuts and think it's okay right now, But as we go along in life, that shortcut we took a long time ago, it begins to become a bigger and bigger gap. And then later on, we can't repair it.
It catches up with us later on.
And I think that's what happens with many people. And when we look at the lives of the life of Prophet Muhammad and Sahaba, he was very strict on them in the very beginning. Even that the night prayers was an obligation. Because Allah wanted these people to be on point, because they were the ones that everybody would follow. And if for some reason they were off, the Ummah would be off later on.
Absolutely.
But we see in the life of Prophet Muhammad and the Sahaba, very strict and very rigid in the beginning to get them on the right course. So now that we can follow them in exactness, and we be on course.
Okay.
And I think that's what happens with Muslims in incarceration. From my experience, what I see is that the mentality is that oftentimes Islam is a practical vehicle for me to do my time.
Okay.
So
it's basically jailing off of Islam.
It's something that I can do. I can kind of say, as they say, kill time. I can be amongst the Muslims. I can do whatever it is, get the amenities. But it's not really something that my long-term goal is there. I don't really see myself 15 years from now doing the same thing I'm doing now with Islam. And if you don't have that mentality that this is something that I'm going to be doing for now up until, and this is not your focus, and you don't want to get it exact, then as time goes on, you're going to make many mistakes. And it's with Islam and otherwise. I mean, what comes to mind is an ayat where Zakaria, alayhi salam, after receiving the good news from Allah that he would have a son, and he goes to preach to his people, he calls them to be dutiful to Allah and establish their prayers. And then he tells the son, "O Yahya, khudh al-kitaba biquwwa." Take this book with force. Take it serious. Be firm upon what you're doing and be exact.
Okay.
And I think from that course, if you do that, then your life will show.
Okay.
But with Muslims, when they have this mentality that I'm only doing Islam in prison, when they come out, they're bound to failure because the mentality already is one doomed to destruction.
Wow.
It's not a focus that I'm going to be a good Muslim when I leave here. It's just something for me to do right now.
Just something for you to do right now. How about not cutting ties with people that are, more detrimental to them? Like they try to, I find with a lot of brothers that go into prison, they try to find this balance, this superficial balance between who they were and who they are supposed to be as a Muslim. So you'll find them, trying to be Muslim, but then when they get around, those old friends, they still put on that face to appease them. And you find them flip-flopping like this the whole duration of their time. And then when they come home, they tend not to be...
It becomes evident. It becomes their reality. And I think, again, that's just, it's the same. They say in drug counseling that a recovering alcoholic shouldn't visit a bar. Even just
obviously,
for the, what I'm saying? So, if you're coming from Jahiliyyah, and
you mean
pre-Islamic ignorance, your days before you was Muslim, the days where we did whatever we were before our acceptance of Islam. Now you Muslim, you was incarcerated, you Muslim now, and you're returning back to society. But you're returning to a society that you left with as a different person. You left as someone that was involved in actions that's completely against Islam. Now, in the prison system, you adopted Islam, you're praying, you're doing these things. If you go back out to that same environment, what is going to happen to you?
Exactly. You're
going back into the environment where they're selling drugs, they're using drugs, they're gang banging, they're doing these criminal activities that Islam is completely against. And somehow you think that I can withstand all of this ignorance and negative activity and still uphold my Islam. I can be a righteous Muslim and a good Muslim hanging around people on the corner while they're selling drugs. I'm not doing it. I'm not involved in it. I'm just hanging out with my friends. They may be your friends from before, but they're not what's beneficial for you now. Exactly. And the long hadith of the man who killed so many people. And he wanted to seek tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he went to one person and he asked him, "Can I repent?" He told him no. He killed him also. He went to another person, a learned man, and he said, I killed 100 people. Can I repent? He says, yes, but go to the land of those who are righteous.
Exactly.
So he's telling him that in order for you to change yourself, you have to also change your environment and change the people you hang around.
Exactly.
The Prophet Muhammad said, be careful who you take as your friend, because you will be on the deen of the one who is your friend.
Exactly.
So if your friends are non-Muslims who are gangbanging, who are drug selling, and these are your friends, you want to hang around them, inevitably what's going to happen to you.
Exactly.
Back to...
another issue that I find with a lot of brothers, that especially those who go into the prison system as Muslims, I'm not talking about those who embrace Islam in prison. I'm talking about those who enter into the prison as Muslims already. A lot of times they don't make tawbah for what they did when they, for what they were. They justify, they do what is called victimize. I was the victim. Nobody in jail is in jail because of something they did. It was always, the police had it in for me. This one didn't like me. They tried to set me up. They victimized. They played the victim role. So therefore, they never see anything that they did that was wrong, which is another step that kind of sets them up for failure, because you didn't make tawbah. You didn't sincerely repent, which means that you didn't see anything wrong with what you were doing.
And I think often, as Muslims, we have a guidance. We have the Qur'an, we have the Sunnah. And it's upon us to read it, to reflect upon it, to digest it, and to put it in our lives. And if we spend more time, it's just generally, this is with no blame necessarily against anybody, but just generally, if we spend more time delving into the Quran and reading and taking the advice that Allah gives us, we would be better off. And one of the things that come to mind is what Allah mentions about Shaitan, that he would make their deeds seem fair seeming to them.
Exactly.
So they would do things, and then Shaitan makes it seem as if it's okay. It's not you. It's the other.
It's somebody else.
It's the system. It's they're after you. So, they're after you. It's a system, but you in the system doing the haram. You doing these things. And then when you get caught, you blame it on somebody else.
Exactly.
Do what you're supposed to do, inshallah. And that's half the step.
And that's actually what Shaitan did. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked Shaitan, why didn't he prostrate to Adam? And he said, I'm better than him. And then he turned around and he said, do you see the one who you favored over me? Like basically blaming it on Allah. You did this to me, that if you give me respite up until Yawm al-Qiyamah, I will lead all of him and his progeny astray.
So the victim mentality.
Exactly. So Shaitan played the victim. He said, do you see the one you favored over me? Meaning you did this to me.
And because of that, this is the reason why I'm in the situation I'm in. So It's not my fault.
It's not my fault.
But what does Shaitan say on the Yawm al-Qiyamah? He makes his khutbah and he says to the one who he coerced to do all this negativity and sin, don't blame me.
Blame yourself.
Blame your own selves now. But that's Yawm al-Qiyamah. What are we going to do before Yawm al-Qiyamah? What are we going to do in our lives where, we going back and forth in prison? We find someone to put the blame on, but we can't. We have to own up. We have to fess up and say, something? There comes a point in my life where I have to change. I have to, if I'm Muslim, let me take this serious and let me change my life. And if we don't, then we only can blame ourselves.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the exit from prison, the release from prison. You find many Muslims, from the moment they take their first footstep out of the door, out of the prison doors, they make a ton of mistakes. The first 5 footsteps, they have made a ton of mistakes that basically sets them up for failure, inevitably. One of which is something that I've witnessed myself, and that is many Muslims, upon their release, the first thing they throw away is the Qur'an. They give away their Qur'an. As a matter of fact, there was a time when correction officers would stand at the door with a garbage bag because they would throw away the Qur'ans. And out of respect for the Qur'an, the COs or the correction officers would be there to, get the Qur'ans and maybe give them away or bring them down to the Muslim chaplain and give it to them as opposed to just throwing them away. And so, how do you expect to be successful as a Muslim upon your release from prison when the first thing you throw away is your guidance, your manual?
And what the Prophet Muhammad will be made to say on Yawm al-Qiyamah about his ummah, or those who call themselves Muslims, that indeed my people took this Qur'an as mahjura, that they made hijrah from the Qur'an. So now here it is, you're leaving incarceration where you had some stability as a Muslim. You prayed, you was with the Muslims, you ate with the Muslims, you did Ramadan, you did some aspects of Islam, and people recognize you as a Muslim. Now you're leaving, and the first thing you're going to get rid of is the thing that's going to give you salvation, that's going to give you success.
SubhanAllah.
And going back out into the world, which is much more difficult.
Absolutely.
I mean, but
where you would need the book more on the outside than you would need it in the inside.
And I mean, this is what the Prophet would made to say, that they took this as a thing to flee from. And Allah says that for those who took my signs, they neglected them. They gave a dead eye to them, that He would give them a difficult life.
A life narrowed down.
Like this very difficult life. And they would ask, say, Ya Allah, why did you, and He said, I will raise them up blind on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And they would ask, why did you raise me up blind when before I had sight? He said, like that, you gave a blind eye to my ayats, my revelations when it came to you. So this day you should be raised up blind.
Wow.
We're Muslims. This is what Allah has given us to guide us. How can we live without it?
Hold that thought. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll be right back with our topic, dealing with Muslims coming in and out of the prison system and the first step in the wrong direction upon their release at the Mardiyah Show. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Mardiyah Show, where we're discussing the first step in the wrong direction for many Muslims upon their release from prison. So, Aquil, we talked about, the throwing away of the Qur'an upon many Muslims released from prison. What are some of the other steps in the wrong direction that Muslims make upon their release from prison? Is it more so the sins that they commit? I remember talking to a brother some years ago, and he kind of went into this monologue about his first step in the wrong direction was going back to live with his child's mother, and they were not married. And he said to me, Shadid, we weren't sleeping together. I understood zina was haram, and I was sleeping in one room and she was sleeping in another room. He said, and I said, well, then how long did that situation last before, shaitan got the better of you both? And he said, it was about a month. He said, I came home one night from work. He said, and the thing about it is that a lot of brothers don't have anywhere to be paroled to. So the child's mother literally becomes the only option. And in the prison system, a lot of times, even if parole allows you to go home, you have to have a safe environment, a secure environment. They send someone out to go check the environment out before you're released. And a lot of times when brothers or sisters get incarcerated, they can't go back to their parents' home, especially if the parents are receiving public housing, because that's one of the issues is that if the child, the person is incarcerated, especially for a felony, especially for a drug offense within 1,000 feet of a school zone, and all of these other rules that they put on or these other restrictions or conditions that they put on the incarceration,
they can't stay there.
They can't stay there. So the only other option is the quote unquote baby mother. So you go home, and it's either that or stay in prison. So that becomes an issue within itself. Where do I get paroled to? Do I go to my baby mother's home and get paroled, or do I just stay in prison and finish, the rest of my bid? And he said that, everything was cool for about a month. And one night he came home and he laid down on the couch, and the child's mother came out in lingerie. And so obviously she had already made preparations for this. And, they slept together. And after it was done, he said that she turned to him and looked at him and said, "Where's your Allah now?" And he said at that moment, he said he punched her. He said he was so frustrated and so upset. And that was the cause for him to go back to prison. He went back to prison because she called the cops on him after that incident. So, and the thing about it is that as he's explaining the situation to me, he said, even as we were intimate, he said, I could feel that Allah was watching me. He said, I didn't even enjoy myself. I didn't even enjoy myself in this situation. And, I let the shaitan get the best of me. So, is it sin that kind of, pulls them in the wrong direction? Or?
Earlier, we mentioned that Shaitan makes the actions of, Bani Adam seem fair singing to them. That somehow in their mind, in their psychology, I'm not really doing that much wrong, or they minimize the wrong, or, I'm just going to stay there because I need a place to stay right now so I get on my feet, and then I'm, so, he tricks us in the beginning. But I think that, and more so for people who are leaving the incarceration into society, we undermine or we downplay how serious sin is and how it affects our lives. Generally, I mean, there's a spiritual reality that occurs in our physical life from sin.
Okay.
Like, for instance, there's a narration about a man he's looking at a woman, he runs into a wall or something. Like, you broke a spiritual law and there was a physical reality as a result of that.
An immediate karma.
You know what I'm saying? So,
right?
Exactly. So we have this reality in Islam. And sometimes when we forget that, it contributes to our physical destruction in our lives. Our lives become, it's a down spiral because we're continuously violating spiritual laws. And one of the biggest ones is zina. You mentioned, zina, fornication, and adultery, like that. So it's a very grave sin. And Allah mentions that it's a sin that leads to other evil roads. So here it is, we start with zina and our lives can never go back. We can't repair.
Wow.
Unless we make a sincere tawbah, but oftentimes that ain't the case. And prison is the easiest way, once you leave it, it's so easy to get back in.
And the thing is that with sins like fornication, you'll find that the guilt beats the individual up more than anything. And that a lot of times is the thing that leads them to this sense of despair.
No.
Like, I know I can't go back anymore. I know Allah is not going to forgive me. So they kind of just, that sin propels them into. And
then what happens, they committed zina, and then they have this guilt. Then they stop praying. Then, so now you start praying. The thing that can save you, the thing that still has, your connection to Allah, you completely give it up.
Exactly.
Even if you committed zina or something of the like, or some major crime, still if you prayed and repented, you still have a chance. But now your guilt destroys you. And these are some of the first steps that people fall into. They've been in incarceration for 2, 3, 4 years. And the natural desire of a man takes over. I'm home now. I'm looking to get married, but what do I do until that point? Whatever, there's roadblocks for me to get married. I'm trying, to maintain myself and, stay away from the major sins, but there's roadblocks for me to get married. I went to the masjid and they won't marry me because of this and because of that. So now, his desires are getting the best of them. There's an ayat these are advices from Allah, but there's realities that we have to confront as communities to help these brothers.
Exactly.
Allah says, all you who believe, enter into Islam completely. And that would be sufficient as advice. Allah, commands us, enter into Islam wholeheartedly, all the way. But then he follows the very next sentence, and don't follow the footsteps of shaitan. Just to say enter into Islam completely would be sufficient. But then behind it, don't follow his footsteps. What is his footsteps? Zina, fornication, intoxication, drugs, all these things.
So we can segue into this next issue, and that is the use and abuse of drugs and alcohol. People tend to, get high to escape a reality that is unescapable, to be honest with you, because once that high wears off, here we are again, back in that reality.
Even worse. And this happens for people who are incarceration and otherwise, but for people in incarceration, they're dealing with the struggles of life. Life is very difficult. It's difficult in and of itself, but now you have the odds against you. In our communities, you're African American, you have a record. How do you go back and apply for a job? And you're Muslim. So now I want to apply for a job. You have all these things that's weighing against you. So the pressure is doubled upon the individual. It's not an excuse, but it is a reality. It is something that as communities, we need to help them re-enter back into society successfully. We need to create something that we can facilitate the success of the Muslims coming from incarceration into society. But the Muslims themselves also have to have the mentality to be helped.
Exactly.
We have to realize that, you know, coming from incarceration, you have to change your way of thinking. You have to change your way of acting. You have to change the way you see reality. You're a Muslim now. And see it from the Islamic lens and not from the lens of how you were before.
Exactly.
You know?
Which leads me to another issue, and that is a lot of brothers come home after incarceration and they feel like they missed something, they lost something. So the first step in the wrong direction is to believe that the whole time that you were incarcerated, that you missed out on something.
How did you get
so
it back?
when I get home, I'm gonna get it all back. I'm gonna show everybody, you know. So it's almost where we get this whole idea of Friday night, Saturday night partying, dressing up, going to the club, because if you go back to slavery, and I'm going to take you back a little bit. If you go back to slavery, when the slaves were on the plantation and they saw their slave owners or masters on Sunday taking their wives and their children, getting ready to go to church, they would dress up real nice in the fancy car. The slave would go get the car ready. The housewife, the house Negro would get the woman together and get her ready and prepped for church. The whole while, you know, the field Negroes are in the barn watching all of this. They don't have any money. They don't have any clothes. They don't even have their own freedom. All right. And they're seeing this every Sunday. These people dress up and go to church and, you know, perform their worship. So quite naturally, it creates a void and a desire, a false sense of, I want to get what they have. So once, you know, slaves were freed, if I could even use, it's almost an oxymoron. The slaves were freed, right? Because we're still slaves, you know. Nonetheless, once they were freed, it's like we got to get back what we lost. So now we're going to create clubs and we're going to dress up real nice and we're going to drive fancy cars, which still exists today, right? Right now, today, Saturday night, there are people right now coming home, taking a shower, getting dressed, getting ready to go to the club in the same neighborhood that you grew up in, seeing the same people every week, dancing to the same songs you just heard all day long, drinking the same drinks that you drank all week long. And what's the point?
But we feel when you lose that, you go into prison as a non-Muslim, and then you accept Islam in prison, and you come out. Now it's like all these years, you know, I didn't do those things and somehow in your mind you think that, you know, it's okay if I dab a little bit here, dab a little bit there, you know. But the Muslims have to realize that, you know, Allah gave us something that's better than all of that. Me growing up in the inner city, in the projects, and involving myself in activities that Islam is completely against, and now being a Muslim and seeing, you know, people look at it from the outside and say, man, Islam is hard. You gotta get up and pray. You gotta do these things. You know, this obligations and this.
Before you go any further, you said you were raised in the projects.
I was raised in the projects.
Okay. So I want that to be real, because some people may listen to this conversation and say, well, these are two practicing Muslims. They don't really know the struggle. You know what I mean? But behind all of what they see, there was a different reality some time ago.
For sure. I mean,
which projects did you grow up in?
I grew up in Bachelor Terrace.
Bachelor Terrace projects in North New Jersey. Yeah. Notorious.
Called BT.
Okay.
So I mean, that was where I was born and raised. And even I had my share of incarceration. You know, as a late teen, you know, my involvements put me somewhere for some time, you know what I'm saying, that, you know, wasn't the best situation. My mother and father were Muslim, but I wasn't raised by them. I was raised by my grandmother. Okay. But I mean, we you know, we had this life prior to our embracing of Islam and living it. And when we tasted Islam, and I mean for myself and yourself also, because we know our background. Absolutely. Allah blessed us to taste something that created in us a distaste for anything other than Islam. And people look at Islam and say it's very difficult. You know, you have this regime that, you know, is too much discipline and things like this. For the women, you have to carve in all these things. But wallahi, it's harder to be a non-Muslim than it is a Muslim. Because look at the lives of criminal Muslims, non-Muslims. You on the block, you don't eat right. You worry about who's going to drive by and kill you. You worry about if this package is going to arrive. You worry about if I mess this package up for somebody, is he going to kill me? I mean, all these things, you know, territory and, you know, compare that to being in the masjid during Ramadan.
Right.
The peace that you feel listening to a qari recite Qur'an on Ramadan versus being on the corner worrying about a drive-by. It's 10 times harder to be a non-Muslim than it is a Muslim. There's peace in Islam. And Muslims have to realize that this is where my fun and my enjoyment and my happiness comes. Not in going back to the party to commit some sin, and then when it's over, I feel guilty.
Even living with the guilt. I mean, it's easier to live without sin than to commit sin and go back and repent.
And
right?
Even with sin, I mean, we have forgiveness, but when your mentality is that I'm going to disregard my religion and be a sinner and think somehow I'm missing something, and this is the reason I'm going back. I mean, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned these 3 qualities that whoever possesses these qualities, they have tasted. Just a taste in the dunya, but they have tasted the sweetness of Iman. And he mentions one is that you love Allah and His Messenger more than anything else. One is you love a brother for the sake of Allah only. And the last one, he says, is that you hate to go back to kufr, to go back disbelief, to go back to the block, to go back to gangbanging, to go back to alcoholism, to go back to drugs, to go back to fornication. You hate it just as you would hate to be thrown into the fire. After Allah has guided you.
Wow.
We have to hate disbelief. And as people who grew up in kufr, and now Allah blessed us with Islam, we have to hate what Allah took us from and guide us and love what Allah guided us to. If we lack that love, we're going to find ourselves going back. The recidivism rate is going to be in us because somehow we still want a taste of this disbelief.
MashaAllah.
We have to hate it. We have to hate it. And this is what I encourage all of the Muslims who experience incarceration on your way out. Hate incarceration. Hate someone telling you you can't call your mother, you can't call your wife, you can't call your children, you can't use the bathroom, you can't shower, you can't do these things that is a God-given human right removed from you. You can't get a visit. You can't see your family.
When you're sitting with your family, get up. It's over with.
So this is what happens to, incarceration. They're taking your manhood from you. You have to hate this and love that Allah is giving you freedom. Allah is giving you ibadah. Allah is giving you knowledge. Allah is giving you these things to make you happy. Allah is giving you remembrance of Him. That in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find satisfaction.
MashaAllah. Well, that's all the time that we have for this segment of our show. Brother Aquil, mashallah, tabarakallah. May Allah reward you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to guide you and continue to strengthen you and make you a benefit for those of us who have had those type of experiences that can relate. Those things resonate with people who have had those experiences. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah allows us to benefit and draw lessons from the experiences that we've had in life, because the believer never gets stung in the same hole twice. And
we mentioned, if just real fast I could, there's a dua that's often said that, we ask Allah guide us to the truth as it truly is, and provides with the ability to hold on to it, and show us falsehood as it truly is, and give us the ability to refrain from it.
Yes.
So that
unmask it and allow us to see it for what
allow us to see disbelief and kufr and shirk and the haram as it truly is, so we can see how evil it is.
Yes.
And refrain from it, so that we don't want to return back to prisons and return back to gang violence and return back to any kind of criminality that causes our lives to be depreciated.
MashaAllah.
For ourselves and our families.
MashaAllah.
And may Allah guide us to protect us.
Ameen. Shukran. Jazakallah khair for coming on the show.
Anytime.
And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you.
In this next episode of the Mardiyah Show, which is a special episode dedicated to some of the challenges that we face as a community, starting with our leadership. We were on location at Warrenenko Park in Roselle, New Jersey, Eid al-Fitr 2014. This event was sponsored by the Majlis Shura of Essex and Union County. In the past 20 years, many Muslim communities have had very little success in terms of Islamic education, professional development, and instilling spiritual stability within our youth. And part of the reason that we have not been able to progress as a community is due to unresolved issues. Some of these unresolved issues have led to heightened tensions between the imams themselves, board members, and even congregants. I believe that our healing process starts with healthy discussions about these issues, which is what we try to capture here in this particular episode. So stay tuned to the next episode of the Mardiyah Show, where we are really meeting Muslims where they are. I am your host, Shadeed Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So what I'm saying is that I think that the first level is that, one, in any relationship, no matter what it is, it begins with a foundation of trust. And as Muslims, we should always give a Muslim the presumption of trust. If we can't presume that a Muslim is trustworthy, then something is either wrong with his Islam or our Islam. The greatest thing that the Prophet Muhammad did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was bring us together through love.